Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm super excited because after being on hold for months at the library, starting at number 600 something, I finally got my hands on my first Colleen Hoover book. So today I'm reviewing Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, which actually came out I think this year. And unfortunately, don't come at me, I only gave it a 3 out of 5. Before I go into my full book review, I always like to do a Booktuber Shoutout. So today's Booktuber is Katie Reads, and why I linked her Booktube is because she does a lot of romance, and she does a mix of wrap-ups, hauls, and TBRs, but her focus genre is definitely romance. So if you want to check out Katie Reads, I'm linking her channel down below. And as always, if you like my content, I would appreciate if you hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you read this book, Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, I would love to hear what your opinion is about this book as well. Year and genre. So as I mentioned earlier, this book was published this year in 2022, and the genre I would put it under romance and drama. Fun fact about this book is when she started reading this book, she actually intended it to be a romantic comedy, but if you've read this book, you will come to learn very quickly that there is no comedic aspect of this book, and it's very much a drama, and I would say minor parts of tragedy as well. A bit about Colleen Hoover, the author. So she was born in 1979 in Texas, and she worked various social work and teaching jobs until she started her writing career. Her first book was actually in 2011, which was self-published, and in 2021 there was a huge surge of her popularity due to book talk. So I feel like I actually don't use TikTok, however I see Colleen Hoover books all over my Instagram, and I think if you've made the jump from TikTok to Instagram, that means you're a pretty big effing deal. So with the resurgence of her in 2021, her books have been really popular. I see them all the time over my Goodreads, my Instagram, and sometimes even my Facebook. A fun fact I wanted to share about Colleen Hoover is her first book called Slam, which she self-published in 2011. She was prompted to self-publish it because her grandma at the time got a Kindle and she wanted a book for her grandma to read. And after the success of her book, which I think actually got popular because a blogger reviewed it, then she decided to quit her social work and become a writer full-time. So it just goes to show you how reviews are really important or significant to someone's career, because she had, I think, self-published that book, Slam, for the year, and it didn't really break out until a blogger reviewed it. So I think it's really cool that if you consume any content that you really enjoy or value, I think if you have the capacity to write a review, because you just never know how it could help someone. A bit about the story and the characters. So the synopsis of this book is we meet Kenna. She is 26 and she returned to his town. We're not really sure why this town has kind of a bad memory for her quite yet. And she turns out that when she was younger, at 21 or 20 years old, she had a boyfriend called Scotty. And they had very quick and very, I guess not quick, but maybe very passionate and very first love kind of relationship. And one night they unfortunately got into a car accident and he died and she survived. And to not spoil the book too much, but she ultimately goes to jail from the accident. And then when she enters jail, she actually realizes that she's also pregnant with her and Scotty's child. But because she's in prison for 5 years, she's not able to raise her daughter in captivity, obviously. And because she doesn't really have family, Scotty's parents adopted, or I guess took in the daughter to raise, for a time being. And now 5 years later, we flash forward, Kenna is now out of prison and she wants to reunite with her daughter. But it's a little messy because Scotty's parents obviously have kind of ill will towards her and that kind of stuff. So Kenna goes back to the town that Scotty and Scotty's parents live in, and she tries to find a way to get a hold of her daughter, but she's kind of scared too because she knows her daughter is raised very well by Scotty's parents. And then while this happens, she meets Ledger, who owns a local bar in the town. And not to spoil the story too much, but there's a bit of history on how Ledger and Kenna is connected. And of course, Ledger and Kenna have a romance as well. So it gets quite messy because the story kind of talks about does a mom have the right to see her child? Can you forgive people for after 5 years of them doing something? And how to set boundaries and that kind of stuff. So as you can tell by the brief synopsis, that this story is very juicy, and for me it was almost a bit kind of unrealistic, but yeah, so that's basically a quick summary of the book. common themes in this book, I picked 3 major ones that I found prevalent throughout the whole book that was also relevant to the storyline. The first one is betrayal, and it's kind of like, sometimes if you're stuck in a sticky situation, is it loyalty that matters the most, and is it sometimes okay to betray those you're loyal to for the bigger picture? So that was a very interesting thing to think about, and I think something that you can apply to your life if you've ever been in that situation. The second common theme I noticed is the idea of forgiveness, and it's kind of like, if you feel that someone has wronged you, how much time needs to pass for you to forgive them, or is it better to just forgive them? Because what purpose does it serve you to hold on to that anger? And maybe, people make mistakes, we're only human, and unless at the time when they wronged you, that they intentionally were malicious. Like, maybe it's better to forgive and let go and move forward. So I'm interested to hear what you think about the theme of forgiveness. The last common theme I noticed in the book is the idea of fight or flight. So, in an ideal situation, when things happen to us, you would want to pick the most rational and the less, conflicting decision that would impact people. But sometimes when you're in a situation, you have this flight response, and instead of fighting or doing what's right, you just think in the moment. And it's not that you're thinking to protect yourself, it's just that you just don't know what to do, so you just act based on adrenaline rush. So that was a very common theme in the book as well. And again, I'm curious, if you've ever been experienced like that, do you feel like you can pick fight or flight, and should you always pick fight, or sometimes is it better to just flight? There's no right or wrong answer. So I thought these themes were very interesting that came out throughout the book. As I mentioned earlier, please don't come at me for giving this Colleen Hoover book a 3 out of 5. There were several things I didn't like during the book, and to be honest, I could kind of see where the story was going to go, and because the writing style, I almost did not finish several times throughout the book, but I'm someone that one of my goals this year is to finish every book I start, because I feel if someone took the time to write this book, it's worth reading. Anyways, so to get into things I didn't like is the number one thing I didn't like, which could be a pro for people, but for me personally as a con, was it was just too smutty for me. I get that it was part of the plot for the 2 characters to fall in love, but I felt there were too many smutty scenes and too many details that I didn't need to know. Wasn't about that. The second thing I didn't like, related to the theme of forgiveness that I shared earlier, is it's very hard for me to put myself in the situation of some of the characters. Maybe I'm lacking the empathy, but for me personally, I am quick to forgive. And as someone who will hold a grudge for 5 years for so long, I can just see that being really exhausting. And not to spoil it too much, but these characters at the end, they flip really quickly to forgive, which is great, obviously, but it doesn't make sense that if someone had chosen to hold a grudge for 5 years, that they could just flip like that right away. And because of that, them flipping so quickly, I felt the ending of the book was very rushed, and almost felt like the author was like, okay, they flipped and now have to wrap up so quickly. I think I would appreciate more if there was more lead up to them forgiving, and maybe more internal dialogue of the people flipping their switch to forgive. Other thing I really didn't like about the book, which almost made me not finish multiple times, was I felt the romance wasn't needed, to be honest. I feel it could have happened. The plot could have driven ahead with a platonic relationship, so it felt forced to me. And I also feel the romance between Kenna and Ledger, it kind of glorifies pushing boundaries and also not communicating. And I think that's really bad. I do recognize that in movies and books, usually they romanticize things that aren't really healthy in real life relationships. And I think that can be very dangerous for young women who read these books, who will look for these behaviors maybe when they start to date or in relationships. And I really didn't like that at all. I just feel like the characters didn't respect each other's boundaries throughout the book, and always kind of just push a little of the envelope. They never did anything that was obviously outright pushing a boundary, but I could feel that uncomfortness, and I wasn't really down about that. And a lot of the characters didn't really communicate that well with each other, which I know gives a bit of push and pull that people like, but for me personally, I'm not really a fan of that. But I also recognize that the things that I like maybe wouldn't sell well in books, and ultimately, you want to write a book that sells. There were things I did like about the book which tie into the themes that ran throughout the book. So one quote I want to share is, "It is what it is, a effed up situation with no evil people to blame. We're all just a bunch of sad people doing what we have to do to make it until tomorrow. Some of us are sadder than others, some of us more willing to forgive than others. Grudges are heavy, but for people hurting the most, I suppose forgiveness is even heavier." And I really like this quote because, in the book, no one is an evil person, and people are reacting because they're scared and because they're hurt. And I think that's very realistic in the world. Like, things aren't black and white all the time, it's mostly gray. And, we're all just doing the best that we can. And I think this book does a really good job empathizing with all parties from both sides, and that, sometimes we just deal with what the cards we have been dealt with. So I really like that there were several very quotable quotes in the book, and just the idea talking about forgiveness and letting go, and just understanding why hurt people. They don't mean to, but it's because they're hurting and they're reacting. And other thing I really enjoy about the book is that, even though I didn't really like it, it was very easy to read because the chapters are really short and it always goes back and forth between Kenna and Ledger. So I think this is a really great book to read if you want to get back into reading and, get on the hype train for Colleen Hoover books. Another thing that I really liked about the book that I didn't know until I read the acknowledgements after is, in the story, Colleen Hoover actually never says the time and place where this book is set. And the reason she did that is she thinks that the story shared is very relevant to anyone, anywhere. There's always people feeling lonely and not feeling supported. And, she did that intentionally with no location or time because it's kind of a timeless story. So I really respect Colleen Hoover for doing that and having that intention to tell the story. On Goodreads, this book, Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, got an average of 4.54 out of 5, which obviously isn't surprising because I think all her books are doing so well due to her popularity on Book Talk and Bookstagram and Booktube, and all the power to her. I do feel though, as time passes, I do personally think the rating will go down just because I think there are some toxic relationship patterns that aren't really healthy, and I think later on people read back and be like WTF, what is this book saying? So first I'll share the bad reviews that I definitely agree with so wholeheartedly. So the first one I saw was they felt the romance between the two characters, Kenna and Ledger, was too sudden, which I 100% agree. And if you read this book, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments down below. It isn't realistic that two of the characters, not to spoil, didn't know each other beforehand because it just doesn't make sense. Although I would argue that we don't know when the book was set, so maybe if it's an older timeline like 1990s or 2000s, it's a possibility that before these characters meeting that there is no chance given the circumstances of them ever meeting. Some people also, like how I felt that some people were quick to forgive so suddenly, which wasn't really aligned with the characters, but I understand you have to wrap up a story at some point. So people like me felt the plot was just too okay, it's going, then we finish the book and it's just really sudden. Good reviews that people had on Goodreads is they love the characters. They like how Colleen Hoover does a great job saying that bad decisions is not equal to a bad person, which I agree with. They love the selflessness that was demonstrated with Kenna and all the other characters throughout the book. And a lot of people on Goodreads were emotionally moved by the book and brought to tears. And some of the reviews were saying don't read this in public. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just not a romance person when it comes to reading books. So I can't relate to those reviews, but I'm really glad that this book touched a lot of people so emotionally because, we deserve to feel emotions at any point in our lives. Why I think you should read this book. Evidently, if you love romance, this book is for you. If you like books about drama, this book is for you. If you like the themes and topics of forgiveness, this book is for you. And for me personally, when I read this book, it really reminded me in high school when I used to read Nicholas Spark books, and it specifically reminds me of The Rescue. So if you read that book, this book will 100% be for you. I love The Rescue when I read it in high school. I think I read it back to back a few times, but I just feel for me personally, I have developed all of that genre. But if you like that genre, I think you would give this book a 5 out of 5 easily. So now I'll share how this book made me feel, because as you guys know in all my reviews, I always love to ask people how a book made them feel, because if you ask me a week, a month, a year, 5 years from now, I won't remember exactly what the book was about, but I'll always remember how a book made me feel. So Colleen Hoover's Reminders of Him, which is so popular on Book Talk and Booktube and Bookstagram, it made me feel heartbreaking, which I know isn't a grammatically correct sentence, but it made me feel my heart ache for the protagonist Kenna, because the guilt she carried, you know, being someone that was charged, going to prison, and then having a daughter and not being there to raise her. I really felt for her. I know that's a really tough situation to be in, and it was just a heartbreaking to read her entire dialogue and the guilt she carried for all those years. That is the end of my book review. Thank you for watching until the end. As always, if you hit the subscribe button, I'll really appreciate it. And if you read this book, Reminders of Him, Colleen Hoover, I'd love to hear what you thought down below. And if you want to join me next time, I have started Beasts of a Little Land by Juhea Kim. And this book so far reminds me a bit of Pachinko, and I can already tell I'm going to give this book probably a 4 out of 5 out of 5. However, having said that, if you do choose to read this, it's not exactly like Pachinko, it's like Pachinko light. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time, and thank you for watching as always. Bye!